Ladies and gentlemen, we do thank you very much for your attention, and now we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the
Welcome to our top travel destinations. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan. I have been editor of the weekly travel news column in the Sunday Independent and the Fine Wine and Food Guide, and I am here to use my decades of experience to help you know exactly where to stay, eat, drink, shop, and explore when visiting the world's top travel destinations. So sit back and enjoy the wonders of travel as we take off on our magical journey together. Welcome to Kevin's Top Travel Destinations. And this week I'm going to talk about a very interesting subject. It is whether Saigon, or as it's now known, Ho Chi Minh City, a word I particularly hate, is the most fascinating city in all of Asia, if not the wider world. I personally would give a resounding thumbs up to that. And by the end of this podcast, I'm going to reveal why I would live there if I had the means and the opportunity and the wherewithal, certainly for part of the year. But first, let me go back to what is it that is so special for me about Saigon. And of course, this is a first-person point of view. We all have our differing views on Asian cities, from Thailand's Bangkok through to Phnom Penh. You've got Tokyo, you've got Taipei in Taiwan, which I visited recently. So there's a plethora of fantastic cities. But why is Saigon my number one? Well, it goes back, of course, to my own personal history. I was 13 years old when I really became aware on the TV of a war that became the background of all our lives. It's very difficult to imagine it now, but this was the first TV war. This was the first time that you had presenters, BBC presenters, ABC News, the American photographers, David McCallum, were there. They were reporting every night on this debacle, this catastrophe that was actually unfolding before our eyes, of young naked girls being napalmed. And of course, there's this appalling photograph of a girl running away from an American bombing of a village. So many people died. It's estimated, now get ready for this, 6 million people died or were wounded horribly in the Vietnam War. Of that number, 58,000 Americans, which is a very small number in comparison with the huge numbers that were maimed and killed and obliterated by bombing campaigns and Agent Orange. But of course, those 58,000 Americans even carried more weight and more punch with the public and with the ongoing scenes of wars and street battles that you saw nightly, coming from places like Saigon, which was the capital of the American effort to take over and stop the communists. And just go back again and have a look at why the Americans were there. So this was in the 1960s, when communism was taking over, and there was this huge swing against it among the Western allies led by America. They had this thing called the domino effect, that if one fell, the whole of Asia would fall, and then slowly Australia would fall, and then it would be Japan, and then it would be America, and Europe would follow soon after. Of course, now historians would look at the domino effect and say, maybe not. But the American administration, after the French had tried to colonize and basically rape the country of Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. Why did they go there, the French? Because of all the rich natural resources like rubber. So you had this imperial colonization. The Americans followed on from the French, who were given a bloody nose by the North Vietnamese, who were a communist state. The Americans didn't think that they would go the same route. They thought that these poor peasant communist army would be bombed out of existence by their superior technological firepower. Well, we all saw what happened to that. It did not. And the Viet Cong, who were peasants, basically running on passion and fear of what would happen if they didn't serve their communist masters. So it was extraordinary hubris. And so every night I can remember as a 13, 14 and 15-year-old scenes coming from Hue, Da Nang, the bombing of Hanoi. Of course, there was this huge reaction against it in the late 60s, the whole summer of love, the whole hippie revolution, down with the wall. It became this extraordinary, powerful theme, anti-war. And I can remember all the art, all the music, everything was anti this war. And it was Nixon who'd taken over from Johnson, and he finally did sort of half put an end to it. But it was all a debacle, and that's another podcast. But then what happened after the war ended in 68, the film law became absolutely so powerful for a young 20-year-old. I can remember going along with my friend Phil and Spencer and Paul to see the unveiling of Apocalypse Now, this flawed masterpiece that Francis Ford Coppola created. It was such a big deal when it came out, I think in 72. So much was Vietnam in our consciousness of how the Americans became sort of twisted and out of control. And it still resonates today when you look at the unveiling of the history around Trump and all of that. You can still see that this has a resonance now. Not only Apocalypse Now, but then you had Platoon, Oliver Stone's masterpiece. You had The Deer Hunter, this extraordinary metaphor of the two American prisoners who were forced to play Russian roulette, and how one of them became so damaged by this. The Russian roulette was the only way he knew how to sort of survive, and there's that tragic incident and the scene at the end of that. And other movies like Hamburger Hill. So it was in my consciousness, and I deeply believed in the anti-war movement. But it was never on travel plans until very recently. And so when I did visit a couple of years ago, as I was in my late 60s, it was like going home. We had this incredible guide, Che. She was really, Saigon is a very modern city. It still has this extraordinary American vibe. The rest of the state of Vietnam is communist. Particularly if you go to the likes of Hanoi, I found it quite dour, and you can see when you arrive there, you've still got this, the communist apparatchiks. You still have this sort of sense of somebody who was the son of a communist military man was rushed. I was chatting to him. He was given right of passage, right of way. So it was very interesting to be in Hanoi and be in North Vietnam, where it's still quite dour and the people are very poor and they work hard. But when you come down to Saigon, you obviously have to firstly do the things like the Tinny Tunnels, which I'll do a separate podcast on. There's the Remembrance Museum, very profound, and it shows both sides. And then, of course, you have the rooftop, the final place when the Americans were finally defeated. And they had to run, and they ran. And it was quite shameful, really, and it's a stain on American history. And, of course, you have that scene of the final copter going out. Unfortunately, left behind tens of thousands of South Vietnamese who had helped the American regime. They were left to suffer the consequences as the communists came in and they exacted their revenge on those that had been collaborators. One of the podcasts I have done showed, I've discovered with my guide Chenny, we found the old rooftop where the final chopper had landed, and I went up there and it was like channeling history. And after that, there was this extraordinary vibe going on in Saigon. It's all summed up in a whiskey bar that I visited just round the corner from where I was staying. This whiskey bar was so sophisticated, so unlike anything I'd seen up in Hanoi. It had a Lamborghini drew up outside. And then this very smart owner sat down at the table next to me to smoke. Lots of people still smoke in Saigon. It's actually called Ho Chi Minh, but they still call it Saigon because they have a sort of a bloody mindedness. They're still sort of influenced by this American presence and the French presence. You see it in the architecture, but you see it in the way that they make money. They're very capitalistic. So this gentleman who owned the whiskey bar, he'd been to Scotland to buy his expensive whiskies. I told him to go to Middleton, the distributor in Ireland, and to see our great range of whiskies, which he said he would do. And he had all the best champagnes, the best brandies, and the Lamborghini arrived, and these very wealthy young folks got out and they started to party. So it's a completely different vibe, and there's a madness in Saigon. And if you go to Saigon, you have to do the traditional things and go and see the war museums and the tunnels, etc. But you also have to get on a scooter and try to go into the traffic. Try to get behind, get a taxi scooter, someone who knows what they're doing. You take your life in your hands and you enter this whirlpool of thousands and tens of thousands of bikes roaring away. You come to junctions where 7 streets meet. Somehow nobody stops. They just keep the foot on the pedal. They go full throttle. You hold on tight to the person that's driving you. You offer up a prayer if that's your way, the Buddhist way, and you somehow get through. And if you stop and doubt, you're finished. There will be a crash. So ultimately, Saigon is a place that I felt so at home in. There's this connection in blood, the blood of all of the people, the 6 million souls that died in that war, which the communist Viet Cong army won. The American with their B-52 bombers and their fighter jets and the billions of dollars they threw at it were defeated and kicked out and ran in shameful manner. The last helicopter left, and that leaves this sort of madness. And Saigon was the place where the communists took over. It was the American city. It was the go-go bars. It was the drugs. It's all summed up in The Doors, the famous group who open Apocalypse Now with that song, This Is the End. So I would love to live in Saigon. I would love to live in one of those French-style chateaus, and I would love to go about and sip extraordinary whiskey and champagnes and enjoy the madness, because it's got that connection. There's something unique, and it's really written into my DNA, that whole anti-war thing. So that's why I vote it as my number one city in the whole of Asia. Let me know your comments, and what is your favorite city? You can get me on Instagram on the top travel destinations. Let's start a conversation and see what you think.